I don't know somebody like Hitler was an HSP. I would kind of doubt it, but it doesn't mean that people who are highly sensitive men can't do terrible things, because they certainly can. Like Hitler was, for instance. He knew how to excite people emotionally, right? By blaming the what became the Allies for the loss in World War One. He wanted to recoup that and rebuild something he created. He thought as the Aryan race, the master race, didn't work for him so well in the end. We can create really fantastic fathers, really fantastic leaders. We can turn out those kind of men that we need in society, but we can also turn out some people that struggle throughout lives. And we can also turn out people who perhaps become really dangerous.
Hi, this is Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete. In this book, you're going to get to hear about two different groups of former high-performance athletes. One group, which is made up of 90% of the former athletes, does not do physical activity on a regular basis and tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. The other group, which is made up of 10% of the former athletes, is doing physical activity on a regular basis and tends to thrive through the aging process, or at least has a better chance at coping with the aging process. We could have taken these folks to a lab and done all kinds of tests on them. Instead, we slowed them down and sat them down and asked them, in their own words, to describe why they're wired the way they are, so that we all, former athletes and non-athletes, can use some of their inspirational and motivational and mindset lessons in our own lives. I hope you pick up a copy today. You can go to theagingathlete.com, and when you have a chance to read it, I'd love to hear back from you to find out what your thoughts are on the stories of these aging athletes.
Hey there, folks. This is Sifu Slim coming to you live from Santa Barbara, California, where the ocean temperature is 57 degrees. Hence the reason I'm still keeping toasty with my scarf on in May. Summer hasn't hit yet. It's been a very cold year in Santa Barbara. Some people are calling it Portland South because it's been an uncommonly cold and long-lasting winter time, but the reports say we're going to get 75 degrees today. I am pleased to bring Tracy Cooper, PhD, currently, I believe, in Kansas City, onto this podcast, and we're going to talk about some things that relate to our human wiring, programming, psychology, and some personality traits, including HSP, highly sensitive personality. It's a trait, of course, not a disorder. We all have certain traits, and this is one that some 20%, I've been told, of people across the world have. And so I'm anxious to learn more about this. Tracy, come on board and tell us a little bit about you and your background and your book.
Sure. Thanks so much, Sifu, for having me on your podcast. I'm delighted to join you. And I'm actually in Ozark, Missouri, which is near Springfield, which is actually 71 degrees as I speak. So we are in early summer in Missouri.
Got it.
So yeah, I've been working on topics related to highly sensitive people since about 2011. And one of the books that I'm most well known for is Thrill. It's on high sensation seeking, highly sensitive people. And that book is actually doing really well, even years later in production. And it's really interesting because there's so much available now as far as people that are life coaches and researchers and psychologists and therapists of all sorts. The awareness level around highly sensitive people is so high now, particularly amongst our own community, but even in the general population, more people are aware of what it means to be an HSP or a highly sensitive person. It's quite interesting to see this become normalized in the culture to some extent, but we still have a very long ways to go.
I also saw SPS, sensory processing sensitivity, temperamental or personality trait involving an increased sensitivity of the central nervous system and a deeper cognitive processing of physical, social, and emotional stimuli. Maybe you can tell us about that and how these two traits relate to our central nervous system and things that we were born with and that were, we evolved in the womb to attain these traits.
Sure, Sifu. So yeah, sensory processing sensitivity is the scientific name for the highly sensitive person. So HSP and highly sensitive person, highly sensitive people, all of those terms are the popular terms that are just out there in the culture. But the scientific name you'll see in all of the scientific literature, the peer-reviewed literature, of which there are literally hundreds of articles with dozens coming out each year of brand new research articles. They're all rooted around this concept of the genetic trait of sensory processing sensitivity, and this idea that about 15 to 20% of over 100 species of birds, fish, primates, including ourselves, tend to be highly sensitive. So sensitivity is being thought of more as a general trait, more commonly along a continuum, with about 15 to 20% at the high end of sensitivity. And what that means fundamentally is that as a survival strategy for the overall species, we need a certain minority, a large minority, in this case, 15 to 20%, who are exquisitely attuned to the environment, both the interpersonal environment and the external environment. They're able to pick up on those subtle cues between people, but also from the external environment. And you can imagine living in the outside, in the outdoors, as it was a million years ago, probably when the trait developed. It was so important to be able to tell friend from foe from a distance. So our ability to pick up on that through a high empathy, our ability to process that more deeply, doesn't mean that we have super hearing or super senses of any sort, but we spend more time processing. And there's a lot of great brain research that shows even when we are at rest, our brains are very active, even more so than in people who are less sensitive. So this more active brain that is processing a greater amount of stimulation that's taken in. Of course, the downside is we have a lower threshold for overstimulation. So that means maybe we're tired more easily than our people that have a higher threshold. So their bar for overstimulation maybe higher, ours is lower. So we're a finely tuned instrument in a very real way. And it's an advantage, but it's also a disadvantage depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, fascinating, Tracy. Guess what I did right before our phone call, speaking of overwhelmed and needing some sleep.
Yeah,
I
it's so common, right? The overwhelm tendency. It's probably one of the most prominent things that HSPs tend to focus on is the overwhelm and the need for downtime and for proper sleep and so on.
so the video, well, that's what I did. Some people call it a power nap. In my books, I say don't call it a power nap. I call it take a break. Don't think of the word power when you're sleeping. It's probably not conducive to good sleep. When you think of power, let it release, let yourself connect to the pillow and forget about what you have to be powerful about. Just let the slumberness come in and soothe you, provide therapy, and allow you to regroup on a mind, body, and spirit level so you can come back out and be productive again and be your smiling, happy, or functional and assertive self, whatever you need to be, and let that happen while you're sleeping. Don't think about power. What do you think about that way of thinking about a nap?
I think that's right, Sifu. We do get that lower bar for or threshold for overstimulation means we are tired more frequently or tired sooner than our other people. And so this need for rest is something that has to be a real sort of counterbalance and something we have to really make a practice. So it doesn't mean that we're making sleep a practice, but it really does at the same time. And if naps are something that really helps to energize you and keep you refreshed, I think it's an important thing to cultivate, as well as getting a proper sleep, during the night, getting enough sleep. And since our nervous systems are more finely attuned to the environment, they are a more exquisitely delicate instrument in a way. And so they do need that time to rest and rejuvenate. So getting that proper sleep at night, that really the deep type of sleep that's really restful and rejuvenates the system, is really one of the foundational cornerstones of not only good functioning, but good mental health and good mental wellness.
Thanks, Tracy. That's very, very helpful comments. I remember reading 30 years ago about Epstein-Barr syndrome, and the fact that these people want to check out and their body needs sleep, and when it needs it, it has to get it, or else they're going to have a sort of a crisis. I wonder how many, I'm sure articles have been written or will be coming out at some point, connecting things like Epstein-Barr and some of these other sleep-related things with HSP.
Well, this kind of leads us to the concept of differential susceptibility, which fundamentally is a theory that's been developed that says that highly sensitive people, because of our lower threshold for overstimulation and our deeper processing of everything that we experience, all of the memories, all of the interactions that we have between people, we spend more time thinking about those. So all of those things are processed more deeply. So when things happen to us, they happen more deeply. So we're more exquisitely sensitive in that way, but also we're more sensitive to pain, and we're more reactive to lack of sleep. We're more reactive to illness. So we tend to feel those things to a more profound degree than might less sensitive people. So there are a number of people who do seem to have either Hashimoto's or fibromyalgia or those types of lingering sort of diseases or illnesses. And they're more exquisitely sensitive to those effects. So an even greater burden for them to learn how to manage those.
Do you mind, Tracy, if I ask you what you were like as a young lad, pre-age 15?
I was how I was a very shy kid, right? So I was never the kid that was extroverted, always the very shy kid that was buried in books, right? The kid that was exploring on his bike. I grew up in the Midwest in Missouri, in small town Missouri in the 1970s, and a different time than today in 2023 when kids are quite different than we were then. So yeah, I spent a lot of time exploring outside. My dad worked odd hours, so he was working sometimes what was called swing shifts, where he would work in the day, he would get a couple hours of sleep and go right back to work. And he passed actually at 49 years old when I was 15. So
Wow.
up to that time, my life had been, stay quiet, go outside while dad's sleeping, right? But in school, my experience had been one of being an extremely shy kid that really did not want to speak up, but I knew all the answers at the same time, right? So kind of a mask, right? And some people talk about wearing this social mask, and I think I was very much one of those persons that was just a question mark to everybody else for the most part. I had a few friends, but mostly in my neighborhood, I was much more active and had a lot of friends. So I wasn't like a recluse. School put me off greatly, though, because of the crowds and the noise and the overwhelm.
So you did wandering the neighborhoods with your friends and on your bicycles and playing games, normal kid stuff?
I did,
Yeah.
and I've had to reconcile a lot of that with what other boys sometimes experience that are highly sensitive that I have interviewed and spoken with. And my experience seems to be a bit different, but we are all different profoundly. If you've met one highly sensitive person, that's the one you've met. If you're going to meet another one, they're going to be very different because
Yeah.
our experiences are very different, and the way high sensitivity manifests and expresses itself can be amazingly different from person to person. So one person is easily overwhelmed by one thing, and another person doesn't register it hardly at all. So it's quite variable even within the trait itself.
Tracy, what are some tips for a person with HSP in a dealing amongst a group activity with, let's say we all work at a nonprofit and we're an HSP person and we're there thrust into something with some dominant personality people or some very high energy people that like to run things, the A-type, so-called A-type person. What are some things that we can do to, what would I call that, to function better in such a dynamic?
First, I would say, Sifu, maybe don't be in that dynamic. And that's part of the thing, is adapting your life to suit your needs, not the other way around. And too often we do that. We adapt ourselves to the boxes that society has already created. And we're vastly outnumbered by the extroverts and by the people out there in corporate America that are, hell bent for doing things their own way. But
Hmm.
fundamentally, we highly sensitive people are more observational, more reflective. So we're more the type that are going to pull the strings, the levers of power behind the scenes. So we're going to let those guys run out there that are yakking all of the time and bravado and banging their chest, but we're actually going to make the decisions behind the scenes. We're going to have a great deal of influence, And we make terrific leaders, right? Because we are more thoroughly processing information. We are thinking more longer term, big picture, where for the most part, corporate America, leadership within that realm, it's neither conscious, it's neither creative, and it's not long term. It's usually how fast can we get to A to Z, make that choice and go on, a good enough decision. Highly sensitive people would prefer to have a more well thought out decision because we also tend to be highly conscientious. So navigating what that means within meetings and your ability to have influence, it's dependent on the particular situation. And sometimes you have to yield to those people that they're doing their thing. That is what their traits are, learning to fit within that paradigm and still have influence in a way that your trait is an advantage. I think that's really one of the challenges of it is understanding how can we still be an advantage on the average? How can we bring in our more well thought out planning, our better observations, and still have those have meaning when people really don't seem to be listening?
I sent you a short video where I was in a very pensive, reflective mood, very early morning. So maybe I processed some of those thoughts overnight, and they were in respect to people that were people who had shared some of their trials and tribulations and their schedules with me. And I chose to present the reason why I've been living the way I have, which is without having a family dynamic around me that's, surrounding my living space, more of friends who are family and connecting with them um, sort of at will when they wanted to get together, when I wanted to get together, when we bumped into each other. Santa Barbara is famous for everybody being connected, the 4 points of separation, those types of things. We see each other all the time, people who are age 20 to age 80. We see each other over and over repeatedly. You're at the beach, you're at Trader Joe's, you're at an event, and there we are again. So we have a lot of ease of reconnecting with people. So if you have any thoughts at that video, after you watch the video that I sent you, maybe share with me some of those thoughts.
Sifu, yeah, as I watched the video, I was thinking, well, how many HSPs I think share some of the same type of thinking on their drives to work in the morning when they're watching the sunrise, the beauty of the clouds, the quietness, right, of the world at that point, the kind of quietness before the storm, before everybody hits the road, and then you're just in crazy traffic, right? And it's profound in a way, right? The emptiness, the quietness, the stillness, and I think we prefer those kinds of spaces. I think by nature we prefer those spaces. Our trait is really adapted to not exist within the center of the tribe, but I think we're on the fringes. So I think that we appreciate, we have high, some of us can be very high in aesthetic sensitivity. So we appreciate the sunsets and the sunrises, and we notice those things really more profoundly and enjoy those, and they have great meaning for us, more so than they might for other people. And we seek those things out intentionally. But in the dynamics of chaos, right? Introducing chaos into our lives. When we have children, there definitely is chaos. And when we have a spouse or a partner, there is definitely some chaos, not only from that person, but from their family that we marry into, that we associate with, and
Yeah.
the friends that we allow into our lives can bring chaos. And so that's a huge part of differential susceptibility for highly sensitive people is monitoring our environment and choosing our environments in as much as we can. So choosing the kinds of friends that really are more positive, more uplifting in a way, that are more balanced, that don't bring in chaos on a daily basis, because that's much worse for us. We do much better than average in positive, supportive environments, but we do worse than average in negative environments. So
Yeah.
the chaos thing is a really important one to avoid in as much as we can.
Yeah, Tracy, and throughout my life, when I've gone into job interviews, once I came to the realization, I didn't know the word HSP until more recently, over the last 8 to 10 years. But I knew that I was very empathetic, very deep. I needed quiet time. I wanted to believe the best about everyone, and sometimes that can come back with a right cross to the nose when you're helping someone and they take advantage of you. So I knew, I was putting my monopoly board in place and starting to learn about which hotels on the boardwalk to avoid. And so years ago, I started in job interviews or going for a new client, that type of thing, I started to know going in that I do not work well with power personalities who are in my midst. If they have their own office, they're in or a separate office somewhere, and they want the support from me and direction from me, empathy from me, helping them settle down when they became, a bore, as they say in Great Britain, then it could work. But if they were going to be shoulder to shoulder with me and asking me to be as they were and to say yes to everything that they wanted me to do, it wasn't going to work. So I started either leading with that and finding out who they were, these people who might want me to work with them, or I've actually even said that in a job interview, I don't work very well with power personalities.
Yeah, that's profound, Sifu, because so many people who are highly sensitive persons tend to be in the wrong career for far too long. And the first book I wrote was on highly sensitive people in career. It's called Thrive. And especially for that reason that so many of us struggle with finding not only the right career, but the all important word boundaries. And it sounds like you have some really good boundaries and understand where those limitations need to be for you. And I think that's a common thing for sensitive people. We don't like those power personalities, those people that are offensive or imposing in a way, because again, it's setting up a negative environment for us, and we are more susceptible to those negative environments. And so it's a natural that we want to keep them at arm's length, those power personalities, those people who are too strong energetically, and navigate those on our own terms and as much as we are able. I can't imagine. And I worked in offices, for many years, and I can think of a few power personalities that were in adjoining offices, and I'm glad they were on the other side of the wall, or that I didn't have to see them all the time. Because, and I can think of one job that I actually walked off the job because of a power personality who was in charge, and it was just a realization within myself. And this was before I even knew about highly sensitive people that I can't do this. It was like I'd had enough, and it's like I just can't do this one anymore. And that's the only time I've ever really walked off a job. It's just not worth it. So it's within us to understand and to navigate that.
Tracy, I'd like to bring in animals to our discussion. I've been fascinated first by hunter-gatherers, and while I was doing that, I spent a lot of time studying tribes of lions, packs of wolves, chimpanzees, bonobos, apes, gorillas, all these types of things. And I think the relationship between hunter-gatherers and all those aforementioned animals is a very helpful thing to consider in our study of dynamics and group dynamics and personalities. And I'll ask you one thing: have you looked over the last 10 years about at the pack of wolves and the alpha male and how the alpha male operates?
I have Sifu, yeah, and it brings to mind there was a National Geographic special on, I believe it was called Black Wolf, and this was an odd wolf that was actually a different color than the other ones, but he was always ostracized by his pack, and he found a way a little bit later when he became reproductive age, when he was kind of chased off by the other members of the pack. He crossed one road as he was escaping them, and he realized that the other ones wouldn't follow him across that road. He was keen enough to understand that if he used that strategy, he could sneak back and mate with the females, be chased off again and again and again, and never have repercussions from it. So he was able to father quite a pack before before his life was over. But to me, that's an HSP thing, is to realize an advantage, realize an opportunity, and be able to partake of that opportunity. So that exquisite sensitiveness, and it didn't take a lot to understand that, hey, there's a reason these other guys are not following me, and I need to exploit that.
Thanks, Tracy. The one point I wanted to share about the alpha male wolf is, you see in cartoons and in mythology and literature, the idea of the strong wolf, no nonsense wolf who can kick out wolves that are not respective of his leadership. And he's the head of that group. And so years ago, I thought that this person is the one pounding his chest, howling on the mountains, etc. But some research came out over the last 10 years, I believe, and I think another documentary was made that hit this point pretty hard, is the wolf that survived as the alpha male leader wasn't the one, because there are other packs nearby that want to take him out when he's marking his terrain or traveling or doing what he does. So he actually, when he has trees and brush and a deeper trail to hide in, that's the trail he's going to use. He's not going to use the main trail and be out in the open because he's a target there. So the surviving alpha male is the sneakiest one and the most creative one. He's like a ninja wolf. He can get back to his pack without being taken out by competitors.
Yeah, Seafood, that makes perfect sense to me. If you can think of, there's a sort of a dividing line between the alpha male and what the reality is. The real alpha male is the one that has the most social capital, right? That can call in favors and can influence people to get things done. And there was an article I saw that said that alpha males and wolf packs actually are not the ones at the lead, they're the ones at the back that make sure the entire pack is in front of them. So they're actually protecting them and managing them in a very careful way. So they are the most clever ones. And some of the most clever people are going to be the highly sensitive persons because they're more aware and more attuned, not only to the external environment and interrelationships between the rival tribes, for instance, but the members of their own tribe and their own capacities to say move along a road or move along a path. Which ones do well, which ones are fast, which ones are strong, which ones are hurting, and be able to provide all that. You can't do that from the front. You have to do that from the rear to be able to see, right, who's doing well and who needs help.
So if we discuss a pride of lions, and there's, I think the leadership in a pride is under 2 years for the dominant male, the head of the pride, and so other people have to be fought off in the interim, and he had to fight somebody off to get that spot. So oftentimes you'll see two lions who are single lions without a pride that are surviving hunting together, age 2, age 4, somewhere in there, and they've grown into these big, strong males, and now they need a pride. So what sometimes they'll do is they'll wait for that head of the pride to go out and mark his territory, or they'll just show up 2 at a time, and they'll have the standoff. They'll challenge him to a duel, basically. And then with 2 against 1, I would guess that quite a significant amount of time, it's over within the next 20 minutes. That I've seen in one video where one lion got on the neck, and then another lion, the 2 enemy lions, ganged up and tackled this other lion together, the head of the pride, and then one gets on the back and just bites down to the point of snapping the vertebrae. And so now the head of the pride is disabled, and then the other 2 get the pride. So one thing I wanted to ask you about is let's take a look at a dominant personality, probably a narcissist, Donald Trump. And you would think that an intelligent narcissist who knows that they need backup, they need it from someone who really is there, whether they're being paid off or not, because being paid off doesn't always provide that bosom buddy relationship that you need, your backer. So he hires Pence to be vice president, or he accepts Pence, and you would think that there would be some sort of a bond there with Pence or with somebody else to watch his back and to be his guy, so to speak. But it looks to me like the relationship wasn't very positive, and then at the end, he put Pence's life at risk, basically, in that debacle in January. So I'm wondering the difference between the narcissist dominant male and the astute dominant male who knows that they need a confidant, a backer, that's not just somebody you hire for money, who could be hired away for money. If you have any thoughts on that, Tracy.
Sure, Sifu. I think that a narcissist, particularly a malignant narcissist, is someone that does not register other people as real humans or relationships as other than transactional, right? How can it benefit me only? In other words, the narcissist world revolves around them only. Everything else is an object to be manipulated, whether a person, place, or thing. It's to be manipulated for a particular end. And I think all of the people within Trump's orbit were objects to be manipulated, with him in the end, and him is the center of the universe. And that's something that is quite different than someone who understands the need to have people on board as a cohesive, effective, efficient team, right, where everybody is committed to common goal, that's a very different thing. And I think that narcissists don't necessarily put those kinds of teams together, but people who really understand how people work, right, and having different personalities within a team, and valuing those, and but actually working from behind again as a servant leader, as someone who understands that people need they need to be cared for, they need to be understood, their capacities need to be grown and nurtured and mentored over time. So it's taking the spotlight off of ourselves as leaders and allowing other people to shine when they do something and they succeed really well at it. It's allowing them to have the attention and not needing the attention for ourselves. The true leader is the one that doesn't have the spotlight on him and doesn't care for the spotlight, but the one that makes things happen behind the scenes.
Bringing up another fun person to discuss who throws up all kinds of red flags, the leader of Germany in the 1930s and early 40s, he had around him some skilled people and a lot of sycophants who were kowtowing to him because of fear. They didn't want to be killed or arrested, have their family's house taken away. And Adolf Hitler in the beginning was this artist who suffered during World War I, blindness for a period of months or a little over a year, where he was gassed and he lost his sight, and he was sort of, I don't think the word failed artist is a good term, because if you don't get into school and you don't make a good living at something, it doesn't mean that you're not that thing. It was his love. He had ability in art. He saw things as an artist. I would say that the word failed artist is not a suitable term for him, but he may have been somebody who had something like HSP. It was drummed out of him by society in the Weimar Republic, in World War I, and then in the collapse of the German economy after World War I. It was collapsed before World War II. So World War I, disaster. He doesn't make it. He can't get into the school. He starts to try to figure out how hard life is. His family moves, and he's just got this tough time. So it's possible someone like him had HSP, or something similar, and then overcompensated for that and stayed at that fight or flight state for the next 20 years post that incident, or maybe 30 years post that incident. And I don't know if you've had any chance to listen to anything or to contemplate that idea, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that individual, Tracy.
Sure, Sifu. I think that the environments that we're in as highly sensitive people, highly sensitive men especially, they can really warp us. Traumatic environments, especially early on, can be tremendously not only detrimental, but harmful to our function throughout life, not only for ourselves, but for other people. So, I mean, really, we can make no mistake about it that being highly sensitive is not the giftedness that so many people describe out there in pop culture. It's a genetic trait that's influenced by our early environments. It's influenced by the genetics themselves, how they're expressed, and it's influenced by the kinds of personal choices that we make throughout life. And those are all influenced by a constellation of factors. So can our high empathy be beat out of us? I think it can be tamped down. I don't know somebody like Hitler was an HSP. I would kind of doubt it. But it doesn't mean that people who are highly sensitive men can't do terrible things, because they certainly can. They can become really incredibly disruptive to families, to communities, to workplaces. They can really make disasters of their own lives by not being in touch with themselves, by not understanding their traits, by not having any real self-awareness of how they function, how they operate. And that's a dangerous thing when you have somebody that's also keenly aware of how to push emotional buttons, like Hitler was, for instance. He knew how to excite people emotionally, right? By blaming what became the Allies for the loss in World War I. He wanted to recoup that and rebuild something he created. He thought as the Aryan race, the master race, didn't work for him so well in the end. So it's something that we need to support with highly sensitive men. Is we need to provide those early supportive, nurturing environments. And we really need to take mental health and mental wellness very seriously, because we can create really fantastic fathers, really fantastic leaders. We can turn out those kind of men that we need in society, but we can also turn out some people that struggle throughout lives. And we can also turn out people who perhaps become really dangerous at the same time. That may be true of any person that's alive, but sensitive people have that extra spark of um, being keenly attuned to how to push emotional buttons. You really want them to push buttons in a very positive, generative way that's benevolent and that helps society and helps humanity.
So Tracy, the next thing I wanted to share is this idea of life as a performance. So one time I called up a guru in Northern California. I was over in Germany at the time, and I didn't have much time. He was very busy, and I said, "What do you think of the idea of life as an acting job?" And he took not offense, but it stunned him because it was one of those things I blurted out in the first minute of our conversation. But since he told me he was busy, didn't have time, I said, I'm going to shoot from the hip and share this thing that I've been kicking around. 10 years post that conversation, somebody told me, think of it as life as a performance. That might be a better way to consider it. So when I go back to Hitler, I'm going to share with you, there was a relationship, even though they never met, between Charlie Chaplin and Hitler. One, their physical bodies were very similar. They both had square heads. They're both petite. They both didn't have wide shoulders. And they were both tremendous actors. And so Charlie Chaplin one time watched a speech of Hitler in the mid 30s, and he said, this man is a far better actor than I could ever hope to be. And Hitler was a big fan of Chaplin's movies, including The Great Dictator, which was a parody of Hitler and Mussolini and other dictators. So what I'm suggesting here is that it might be possible for someone with something like HSP or something on the Asperger's, on the autism scale, that they can overcompensate, and they get so good and so protected by the wall of being an actor that they can live that throughout the rest of their life. And in private, Hitler was watching these Charlie Chaplin movies and other movies, many of them from Hollywood, and laughing and carrying on like an adolescent. Those are known facts. When he was in Berchtesgaden at his retreat, that was one of his favorite activities. And what I'm wondering is if we can take some of the things I've just shared and then talk about someone like Jonathan Winters, who is an incredible comedian, ad-lib comedian, prepared comedian, actor, who had a very dark life. And a lot of comedians have that. Robin Williams had that, wound up taking his life by hanging himself. And the list goes on. George Carlin, a very dark inner life and substance abuse. And Michael Jackson, a performer. Many of these people have that dark side, and they're more at home when they're performing and when they're on stage. And I'm wondering if it's possible, if Hitler got so good at performing amongst his staff, amongst the people he had to greet, the foreign dignitaries, and when he got on the microphone, that he could have pulled it off for a period of under 15 years at that heightened state of productivity and acting.
Yeah, Sifu. So it's our ability to think of life as a performing role, right, is something that we act out, that we perform, particularly for men. This is an interesting conversation because I'm co-producing a film called Sensitive Men Rising with Will Harper. And we're planning to release actually July 16th this summer. We look at a lot of these people that you mentioned, and we're very aware of Robin Williams and many of the characters that not only comedians, but performers. Chris Cornell from Soundgarden, for instance, had a dark life and wound up being lost to suicide. And that's a concern that I care very much about, is mental wellness and reducing suffering. But this dark side is something that's often hidden in our ability to perform in public. It's something that I think about myself as someone, as I described in my early life, I was someone that was extremely shy, socially withdrawn. But at the same time, because I'm a high sensation seeker, I had a drive, right, to break out of that and to find a way to mitigate that. So oddly enough, in a way, I've learned how to perform very well before a camera or before a crowd. But in my private life, no, I go back to this other thing that's very quiet. And, I spend a lot of time really alone or with my wife or happily with my cat, right? I have a female Siamese cat that really bosses me around, but it's peaceful, right? And it's contenting. But our performance, our performative masculinity is something that causes a tremendous amount of problems in our world. And that's something that historical figures like Hitler, you have to wonder, their ability to understand how to get over on people, a role. I think it leads back to some of the historical figures that we've seen that have caused a great deal of trauma, even in our current world with Putin. The idea that he could communicate to the Russian people and to the world that, the Cold War was something that was bungled, at the end, that they lost the, Berlin Wall. I was in Germany. I served in the US Army in Germany from 83 to 84 to 85. So I was there shortly before the Berlin Wall fell. And I understand this idea that, we won, the Allies won, the Cold War is over. But wanting to resurrect that and push those emotional buttons and act in a role that says, no, I want to rebuild the USSR as it was, the Soviet Union, it seems to be a pattern, a cycle. I mean, it really ties in back again with Hitler, again, wanting to rebuild something that's been lost, but their inability to move on, but they're also their keen understanding of how to push the emotional buttons in people to get them excited and aroused enough to garner power for themselves, such as Putin has done in Russia.
The artist that was Adolf Hitler, and you can see this in engineers' personalities. They're people that oftentimes are not coachable. You can give them a directive and they want to figure it out for themselves. And when they're ready, they may ask you for something, but they tend to not want this full list. If you give them the job, you give them a few key points, then they want to go at it on their own. And I was in the financial services industry for many years, and people in that industry said, stay away from engineers. You don't want to deal with them. They're going to analyze this thing for the next year, and then they may go and find a way to do it on their own. That's their wiring. So stay away from engineers. Stay away from people who don't have money. Stay away from engineers, and then you'll have a starting point that you might be able to live with. So I'm thinking about Hitler as an artist slash engineer builder, and he's building this 1,000-year Reich, including buildings, freeways, systems, the Autobahn, just like Louis XIV, this giant governmental structure that has to be funded. You have to have the uniforms, you have to have all of the hardware for it, and you have to have the people on your side. So he's building this thing, and you can't say he didn't do a phenomenal job at building something. He certainly did. It was like Darth Vader, building up the Death Star. And when it came to the point of seeing that it wasn't going to work, that Russia, the Soviet Union, and the United States, and then all of the other allies, it was just too big and too much force for him to contend with. His health was failing at the time. He had several different things. His hand was shaking. I'll list in the comments the other ailments that he had. But it seemed like he was a sculptor who wanted to break his halfway done or 1/4 of the way done sculpture at the end, and he was okay with having the whole thing come down in rubble in 1945. So if you have any thoughts on that, please share.
No, it's very interesting, Sifu, and it invites me to reflect on, these people that have created these very dark visions of the future, and when they do start to become non-viable, they still cling to them at the end. Even as it's burning all around them, they still cling to this vision and this idea that they're right. They cannot admit that they're wrong, and that's a classic sign of a narcissistic, malevolent personality, is this inability to admit fault, right? And they'll literally let the world burn around them before they say, "Oh, it's wrong," or do anything about it to correct their faults. And it's one of the things that we as sensitive people, we need to counterbalance a lot of that. We serve as an effective counterbalance to the rest of the world. We're outnumbered by extroverts. We're outnumbered by people that are way more, their threshold for overstimulation is far higher than ours. So we have to be the wise leaders. We have to be the ones that are healers. We pick up the pieces very often with people. We become therapists and counselors and people that are guiding people back to wholeness and wellness. And we're also educators. So many of us are in not only K-12 education, but post-secondary. I work at the university myself, and I see so many fellow professors and I see so many students that I can say are probably sensitive, because I can see it. I can see it in the way that they conduct themselves and the way they support other students or the way that they approach teaching as a practice. But we need to counterbalance a lot of that as much as we can. And that's not an easy task because so many of us don't even know that we're highly sensitive. So it's a tremendous mission to get the word out there about high sensitivity, to communicate it in a really accurate way so people aren't subscribing to false notions about what it means, because it is a scientific trait that's continuing to be studied by some of the top scientists in the world and find publication in the best peer-reviewed journals. Historically, though, our ability to counterbalance needs to be amped up. In our current world, we look at the 21st century, we're 23 years into it. And here we are with a big war again. Why? Why do we allow this to happen over and over and over? And there doesn't seem to be an effective way to put the brakes on and not allow these people into power before they cause these catastrophes like in the Ukraine, which is, for a lot of sensitive people, is overwhelming to see the footage, to see the destruction. You can imagine World War II, when the whole world seemed to be on fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fascinating, Tracy. Just a few more things, and we can regroup another time if you're open to it. I wanted to mention to you about 1992. I'm on a trip in Costa Rica, and we're on a tour bus, and I meet some Americans. One of the gentlemen was athletically built person. I'm a athletic and fitness person, have been since I was a little kid, and it's kind of my I would say my driving force of mind, body, and spirit wellness, and helps my sleep, helps everything else. So I'm listening to this person, and we were talking about his boot camp, and he's like a contractor person who can just get it done, and no saw is too heavy, no ladder is too high. I'm a doer. I can create, and no task is too difficult. And then we talked about his boot camp experience. I asked him about that. I've not done boot camp. I've done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu since 1997, a lot of hard physical things and some hikes with, big backpacks on, that type of thing. But I've never done boot camp on limited food, limited sleep, getting gassed, all getting yelled at for a good part of the day, and having everyone else's, I have to watch their backs, that responsibility. So I asked him about the physical challenges of this thing. He said, yeah. He said, some of us, he was saying me and the people who could, some of us could do all that stuff, but other people were just weenies. And when he said that, it hit me because, here I am 30, just about 31 at the time. And when he said weenies, and he was discounting people who couldn't do what he did as weenies, almost like they were not useful to the military, I said, that's a thought I'm going to come back to. And I don't know how, but someday I'm going to come back to that. And about 5 years ago, I came up with the idea because I realized who I was, the medicine man, the person with circumspection, the person with empathy, the person with helpful decision making, I hope. And I said, a tribe of people or a military small group, they need someone like me as much as they need that person who can climb the hill and wipe out 10 people all by himself. You need both. I can do the therapeutic things and all those other things that I just mentioned, and you need that in the small band in order to make that small band arrive. Tell me if you have any thoughts on that, Tracy.
Yes, Sifu, for sure. Being a U.S. Army veteran myself, I think of an article written a couple of years ago by a Navy SEAL named Jim Ewell, who did his dissertation on just this topic that, Navy SEALs are taught that, kind of a different view, not only of masculinity, but how they collaborate and communicate and work together. It's not these alpha males so-called alpha males that are huge muscle-bound guys. The guys that are really effective are the guys that can work together, right? The guys that have multiple skill sets, that even have crossover skill sets. So everybody can do everybody else's job. But so you need those people that can cooperate and communicate. The guy that's out there as the lone assaulter on the hill is the one that usually gets shot because he doesn't have anybody watching his back. He doesn't have any plan in mind. And having been in the Army working on the Hawk anti-aircraft system, I mean, we guarded the skies for southern Germany in 84, 85. Very tight-knit crews, right? So my job, I performed different roles on the crew at different times. And my ability to do that job with deep conscientiousness was extremely important. But our ability to cooperate with each other and to communicate had nothing to do with how tough a guy was or how manly a guy thought he was. If you couldn't communicate and if you couldn't have, if you couldn't collaborate with other people, if you couldn't have honest interactions, there was no trust that that guy had your back or was going to do his job properly. So even though a lot of guys in the military are tough guys, right? They can withstand quite a bit. That's not the measure of a man. The measure of a man is in how he treats other people and in how he views himself during this life, right? And it's how we allow other people to benefit from what we've learned. It's not hoarding it all and say, you can't do what I do. Well, if you ask a fish to climb a tree, he's going to think he's crazy. He's going to think he's incapable. But if I ask the tough guy to be a professor and chair a dissertation defense, he's going to feel pretty incompetent. Just as I might feel incompetent packing a 100-pound pack up a mountain, assaulting a position, which, by the way, I've already fulfilled all of those requirements of masculinity going through boot camp and going through all of the tough guy stuff. So I have anything to prove. So I laugh at those kinds of guys because I see them all the time. You can't do my job. Well, I wouldn't want to do your job. I want to do what I'm talented at and what I'm good at. And your job is necessary and my job is necessary. But it's not necessary that we be tough guys and that we be insecure in the fact that we need all kinds of people. We especially need people that can collaborate and communicate and work together. We need those leaders such as yourself, Sifu, that are able to detect when people are hurting and what they need and how to mentor them forward. And we need to focus also on that inward life, right? That spiritual life, mind, body, spirit, so that we're encouraging people to think inwardly. And our world is so the opposite of that now. We're so external. We think external, and we have influencers that tell us, this is how I am, this is how you should be. We pick up on it by osmosis almost. We need an internal focus. We need to think internally and to explore our inward selves. That's the last frontier. The most profitable frontier is inside of ourselves and within each other as community, and finding our place within that as mentors and healers and guides and leaders. We need all of that.
Tracy, the idea of ability when you're a golfer or a tennis player or a football player, it's very easy to assess and to tell people, and you don't have to brag about it. You just say, oh, I've been playing a long time. I'm currently a 2 handicap in golf, or I'm a 5.5 in tennis. It's my main thing. Or I was a Division I football player, and now I do yoga and I do running. So people can assess that ability very readily because there's a system that we all understand. It's a language we speak. We're in tune with those levels. When it comes to intuition, the hunting and gathering tribes, let's say the Sioux Indians in Kansas way back when, they had people that had intuition, and they knew to tap into that individual's intuition when they needed to help find a direction to water, food, safety, a higher area to go in a flood, all those types of things. The people with intuition, they all knew who that person was, and that person tried to teach younger people in that tribe, that had some interest in that or that had some ability, how to tap into their intuition. So it's this word that I've been coming to grips with over my life, because I would say that my intuition is very high. There's no way to rank it because you can't come to me as a clairvoyant and I can instantly do that at all times. But it's like a wave of energy that comes in. When it comes in, I feel like when I'm at peace or when there's something that needs to be done, it's like a wave of energy that comes in, and I can find a direction. And the way I define that to people who don't understand intuition, I said, you're out on a trail. Intuition is knowing where to put your foot. And it doesn't mean just the next foot, it means the foot to where you have to go. And that's one little piece of intuition. And I wonder if that's something that you've looked at and tried to define or try to assess, and is there a way for people to grow their intuition?
There is, Sifu, and highly sensitive people by definition tend to be highly intuitive, right? So it's hard to be high in empathy being one of the core aspects of the trait without the high intuition at the same time. Being able to intuitively know how someone else is doing, being able to enter their experience as if it were your own experience, And then even better, being compassion, empathy leading to compassionate action is even better because it doesn't always lead to compassion, but intuitively understanding how to help or how to listen, right? Those things become so important, but the intuition and being able to develop that, I think everybody's capable of intuition to a certain extent. Intuition really is the most primitive form of intelligence in the sense that before we had rational thinking, we had gut instinct. We knew which step to take next and where to put our foot, because we had this sense, this instinct, if you will, what would keep us safe and what would help us reach our goal. But also, between people, our instincts for people, right? What the members of a team, the members of a tribe, how to grow them and nurture them so that we don't have to stand front and center as the sole leaders, but co-lead is really a more effective strategy. Developing intuition is about learning to trust your own inward self, right? But again, that's the focus is not towards that in our current world is looking at the interior, but we really should focus on the interior. And sensitive people, we dwell there anyway. So we bask in intuition. We function with intuition a lot. In fact, it's hard for us sometimes to be rational thinkers and really develop that, but we have to counterbalance both of those. So our intuition can lead us somewhere, but then we need a certain amount of rational thinking to help us assess and evaluate whether that's the best choice to make, because intuition may say, I see 2 or 3 different options. I feel the way forward, but now I need to think what's best for everybody else too.
Thanks, Tracy. I want to list your website here, then I'll list mine, and then I have 2 more things, and then if you can hang out for another 4 minutes, then we'd be good to go. drtracycooper.org is one of your websites, and then your film that's coming out. Information could be found at sensitivemenrising.org. And perhaps once the film's been out for a while, you might wish to share a little bit about the reaction, the emails that have come in, the news media that picked it up, and that type of thing. I'd love to talk to you maybe a month or 2 post the release of this documentary, if that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely, Sifu. Yeah, I would love to talk about Sensitive Men Rising, the documentary film, once it's been out for a little bit and we start seeing the level of self-awareness that's rising in men. People are hungry for it. People want to hear it, right? And this is something that we've been working on for almost 3 years now, and so it's been hard to bring into reality. But we're finally in the end zone, and we're actually really got steam going, and we're ready to premiere this thing. Hopefully July 16th this summer, and I think it's going to make a big splash. There's going to be people that dismiss it out of hand and say, "Oh, you're a bunch of weenies." Right? There's going to be plenty of guys that say, "No, I recognize that. I understand that. I understand how that's an advantage." Or, my brother is highly sensitive, or my sister is highly sensitive. And my experience is that my mom was highly sensitive, and I had a sister that was highly sensitive. So I see it around me many times. But yeah, I'd love to come and discuss more of the reactions to it. I think it's going to be fantastic.
That'd be great. And I'll share my website. I have sifuslim.com, and I have 2 of my 3 books available there. And then huge YouTube content on 2 different channels. This interview is being featured on The Real Show with Sifu Slim. And then I have another YouTube channel called Sifu Slim, which is more me sharing my thoughts about things that other people are going through, I'm going through, reflections on things that I've learned that I hope will help people in their path. And I have one final question for you, Tracy, and that is, if you have HSP and you are presenting yourself as a leader, what's a way to do that doesn't weaken yourself by saying I'm highly sensitive, by some of the adjectives and phrases that might go into the skill sets, the traits that we have that would help an organization in terms of our leadership of the team that we're asked to lead?
Well, that's a great one, Sifu. Thanks so much for asking. And if we are in a leadership position as a highly sensitive person, I never advise anybody that they have to wear a label or a hat that says I'm an HSP. I don't think you should do that. I think your skills and your capacities and your talent should be evident. In other words, if you are a creative person, if you are a conscious leader and you understand the importance of navigating the inner world and the complexities of nurturing and mentoring other people, I think those things become self-evident in your style, the way that you present yourself to the world. So I think that you can present yourself, not only as a compassionate leader, but as someone that is also goal-oriented and achievement-oriented. All of those things are not incompatible with being highly sensitive. And sometimes people stereotype and cliche what it means to be an HSP, but those things are just that. They're cliches and they're stereotypes, and they're not true. There are many fantastic leaders at the highest levels. Martin Luther King, for instance. Abraham Lincoln most likely was an HSP. Albert Einstein was most likely an HSP. I could go on and on and on with the people that have become highly successful throughout history that have been able to apply the idea of the genetic trait of sensory processing sensitivity or the highly sensitive person without even knowing it. So it's not necessary that we have the label or we wear it or we describe it to anybody else. I think other people will know readily that we're high in empathy, that we care about other people's experiences. But they'll also know if we're creative, and they'll also know if we can actually reach goals in the end, and if we're effective team leaders. Not all of us will be, and it does take some work. So we're not presenting this neat little stereotype, oh, they're all going to be great leaders, because they're not. Everybody's going to be suited to different things. As I said, all HSPs are different. So if you've met one, you've met one, but there are literally 1 billion men that are highly sensitive, 2 billion HSPs in the world. So that's a not insignificant minority of the population, but a large minority. And if you're in a leadership position, I think that you have an opportunity to consciously and creatively cultivate what it means to lead and what it means to be an organization, to be a mission-based organization and to achieve great things in the world. But you have to learn to navigate not only your own self, your own internal, often intense world, but be able to navigate that with other people so that you are most effective in leading organizations.
Thanks, Tracy. I appreciate it. And we've been talking about men, and we're both men, and we would love to hear from a female who's got expertise with HSP. If you happen to know anyone, Tracy, I'd love to connect with that person and see if she's willing to share a discussion online. And I'm open, as always, for other people in any field who have a passion about what they do, who have something they wish to share, and have a nice intellectual and heart open, mind open discussion for this podcast. So please reach out to me through sifuslim.com, and we will connect that person in the upcoming time. Anything else you need to share, Trace, before we say adieu?
I thank you for having me on your podcast, and I wish you all the best of luck. And I would love to say to the world that highly sensitive people are among you. We've always been with you. We're a great asset to the species. We're your brother, your sister, your mother, father, your coworkers that you love, the creatives, the teachers, the nurses, the healers, the leaders. We're at all levels of society already, so we're not new. And I'd like for you to think of this as a normal trait, not as something that's pathological in any way. It's not a disorder, can't be diagnosed by a psychologist because it's not in their statistical manual of diagnoses. It's something that's normal and natural, intended by nature. The more we embrace it and the more that we express it confidently in the world, the more that it truly does become an asset. And it really is meant to be an asset to the species.
Perfect way to end it. I appreciate it, Tracy. And so we'll connect through email, and I'll send you the link when it's online. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks so much, Sifu, and it's been enjoyable.
Audience, please like and subscribe and leave your comments below. We'll see you next time. All the best.